Well, on behalf of the Theological Commons program, I want to welcome all of you to MTSO this evening, and also welcome our viewers who are joining us on the web. Tonight's program came about through conversations and a proposal from our director of the library, Paul Burnham, who is here tonight. So thank you, Paul, for encouraging this program to be on our campus. The Reverend Kristin Langstraat is System Director for Faith Community Relations for OhioHealth. She is an ordained elder in the United Methodist Church, having completed her Master of Divinity degree at the Claremont School of Theology in Claremont, California. After seminary, Kristin did a CPE residency at the University of Minnesota Hospital and then served as a parish pastor in Minnesota. Should I say Minnesota? Probably, yeah. She served as a volunteer in mission in Italy for 4 years and then did another CPE residency at Yale New Haven Hospital in Connecticut. Kristin completed her supervisory CPE at the Fairview CPE Center in Minneapolis. And currently, she supervises CPE students in the OhioHealth Chaplain Residency and through an innovative community-based intern unit. In addition, she does education in local congregations about health ministry, pastoral care skills, and end-of-life conversations, which is why we have her with us tonight. And Kristin has brought other members of the pastoral care staff, so we welcome you and thank you for being here and leading us and thinking about this difficult topic together. So please help me welcome Reverend Langstraat.
I'm going to take this off because it jingles with the keys, and I don't like that. I told Kathy that I wanted to stand on the stool because it makes me feel like I have a little more authority. How important that is, yeah. So for our time together tonight, I just want to share a little bit about my background, how I came to be interested in this topic, and then we'll move into some other pieces, but I want it to be interactive since we are a smaller group, to just be able to ask questions as we go along. Let me introduce you to some of the folks that I brought with me who can help answer some of those questions because they're working with this every day. Michelle Baker works with our hospice program, so she's having conversations with folks about this all the time. Tony Cluckley also works with hospice. Jeff Slider works with Morrow County Hospice and was trained through OhioHealth, so we're proud of that. And then Alan Murphy is our clinical ethicist at Riverside Methodist Hospital, so he can answer some questions about kind of legal issues, ethical issues, how things work in the clinical environment that might be helpful as well. So they're here to help out in case I get stuck, and they can answer some additional questions. So I moved here to Ohio in the fall of 2012, but before I moved here, as Kathy said, I was a hospital chaplain in Minnesota, and one of the tasks that hospital chaplains had in our health system was to talk with patients about their advance directives. If they brought them into the hospital and when they were admitted, we looked them over, we validated them just to make sure they had the right elements, and to make sure that they were placed in the chart. That way they were present and accounted for if the medical staff had need of them. And we were also tasked with having conversations with patients about advanced care planning. So we could help them think through what treatments they might want or not want, help them to come up with questions that they might want to ask their medical staff so that they could help them think through things that we didn't know how to answer. We helped them think with their family and friends about what hospitalization meant, and we talked about situations that had good outcomes and ones that didn't have such good outcomes. So the chaplains were really an integral part of trying to help folks plan and talk about the values that they had around life and death. Sometimes during those discussions, they didn't turn out well. So we made sure that we validated advance directives, and that was easy, but it was having the conversations that was harder. And often that was more difficult because when they got to the hospital, it was too late to start considering those things. You can train your chaplains up to have good conversations about that, but if they don't happen before folks get to the hospital, it's sort of a catch-22. So family was sometimes left having to guess what their loved one would have wanted. Some families did that very well. They knew their loved one really well. Some families, they just had no clue. They had never even broached the subject. So I saw this increasing the suffering that was going on in the hospital. It increased the suffering of families who were troubled because they didn't know exactly what their loved one might have wanted. They were hoping that the healthcare choices that they made were the right ones, but they couldn't be sure. And sometimes the patients suffered. They stayed on life support longer than it might have been needed. They endured some treatments that they may not have wanted. And in addition to that, one thing that we may not always think about is that the staff suffered. The nurses and the doctors would sit with families as they struggled with decisions. They didn't always agree with the choices that families made, but they still carried out those wishes. And they were charged with keeping patients comfortable during sometimes painful procedures. So we also had to attend to those suffering folks in our midst. Now, as any hospital chaplain can tell you, those situations can be heartbreaking, and we all support the parties as best we can, and we often think there's got to be a better way than this. So one better way is to encourage the conversations to happen even before patients get in the door of the hospital. And one better place that we can have those conversations is in faith communities. So if you think about it, every time we gather as faith communities, we're talking about life and death. We're talking about what makes a good life, what it means to live, and what it means to die. We talk about what our faith says about all of that and how we feel about it and how we might think about moving from this life to the next. We have funerals and other rituals at the time of death in our faith congregations. And so I think the thing that's different for us as a society now is that we have a new piece that we're looking at, and that's how much power we have in making the decisions about when we live and when we die. Medical treatments are really advanced, and things that we may have died from 50 years ago or even 10 years ago in some cases are not fatal anymore. And so we have choices to make about how much intervention we want. And for many of us, our faith helps us to make some of those choices. So I was invited here tonight to help start some of those conversations. How many of you are serving a faith congregation right now? Okay. So some of you may be well on your way to having these conversations, and some of you may have questions about exactly how to do that. Others might be thinking about how to talk with family about it. Maybe you're the one who wants to have conversations with your family, and you're trying to think about exactly how to do that. So we're here tonight to offer you a little bit of context for why we need to do this, as well as some tools that you can take back and share, either with your family or with your congregations or whoever you think might need to think about having these conversations. Because frankly, we all have people in our lives who will end up in the hospital. We will end up in the hospital. So it makes sense that we would think about it. So each of you has a folder on your chair. And the format for tonight is just to walk through some of those materials and also to answer any questions that you might have. Like I said, we have folks here who are working with us every day and can try and answer some questions that you may have brought with you tonight. Let's see, what else? I'm skipping over the previous format I had in my head. So one of the articles in your folder is called "The Town Where Everyone Talks About Death." It's a very happy town. The town where everyone talks about death it doesn't sound really cheery, but the town is La Crosse, Wisconsin, which is a perfectly lovely little town. But at Gunderson Lutheran in La Crosse, they have made a huge effort to get out the word about having end-of-life conversations. In fact, the states surrounding La Crosse, like where I was in Minnesota, started following their protocol for having end-of-life conversations. Now, in La Crosse, it seems normal for everyone to be talking about it. And folks who don't have an advance directive or who have not had these kinds of conversations with their families seem a little bit weird, which you'll find when you read the article. About, I think, 93% of people in La Crosse have an advance directive. So it's been a very successful program, and that's why I like to talk about it, because I just think it's so important. So I think the questions that come up is, if it's so effective, and if it can become so mainstream, why is it so hard? So why doesn't every community do this? So what do you think? Why is having these conversations so hard? Any ideas? Yeah. That is my first bullet point. Good job. Right. It's huge. People, if they're not afraid of death itself, they're afraid of dying. They're afraid of the pain, the uncertainty, where their family's going to end up, if they're going to be cared for, the suffering that it causes for everybody. And most people want to avoid talking about those kinds of things. So I think that one way we can frame the conversation, I don't know that we can necessarily get rid of that fear. We're human. Everybody's afraid of that. But we can also frame the conversation in talking about how to care for our loved ones, how to decrease their suffering when we're in the hospital. And I think a lot of people respond to that. So if I can make it easier for my family, I want to do that. So that's one way that we can frame it, to maybe do a little workaround on that. While it's sad and difficult to have those conversations at that time, it can actually relieve suffering. And I think that that gives some folks a lot of hope that, okay, I'll bite the bullet and do it if it means that it'll make my family more comfortable. So, any other reasons? I guess my list. Yes. I didn't even have that on my list, but that's good. That's a good one. If you talk about it, you're going to die sooner. Has anybody heard that before? Yeah, like if you talk about death, you better knock on wood. Or, you know, I haven't been sick for a long time. So, yeah, bringing up the conversation is scary just because we don't talk about it. I think it's a piece of the being afraid of death. It's just a corollary, I think. Any other things that you can think of? Yeah. Well, I know somebody who can explain it. Do you want to talk a little bit? Alan works a lot with end-of-life issues and situations where people have not had those conversations. So could you share a little bit about what you shared with me when we were kind of talking this through? And they can avoid the conflict, because by the time this is happening, they're out of it. But they're causing suffering for their family, trying to sort through all of it. Yeah, and there's still physical suffering for them. Yep. And the other thing I think that we talked about when we were sort of talking this through, Alan, was kind of being careful of who you give your medical power of attorney to, because if it's somebody who isn't necessarily going to carry out your wishes, that's not good, because you want that to happen. But also, sometimes the loudest voice wins in a conflict. The person who advocates the most, even if you wrote something different down, will get their voice heard. So that's another thing to think about when you're making these decisions, is who am I going to make my decision maker? Who do I trust to do this? And then to actually make sure that you've had the conversation with them about what you want. Otherwise, they're flying blind. So again, in your folder, there's a information sheet about, I can't remember what it says. Is it making choices? Is that the one? Yeah, I think it's the first one on the right-hand side. But it describes a little bit about, so if you're agreeing to be somebody's medical power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney, these are the things that you're agreeing to do. So if you do an advance directive and you want somebody to be your healthcare power of attorney, give them this sheet of paper, because this will tell them a little bit about, this is what you're agreeing to do. If you can't agree to do these things, cool, but I'm going to choose somebody else. Okay? Does that make sense? Did you find it, Cian? Did you find it? Okay, good. Cool. All right. Other reasons why people don't want to have these conversations. You guys are doing great. Exactly, they're not fun. Very insightful, thank you. They're not fun because we're afraid of death and, we're afraid of conflict and all that. Yeah. Yeah. That's something that we don't always address in end-of-life conversations, but it's definitely a concern that people have of how much money do I have in the bank? Then I have to talk about how much money I have or don't have in the bank. It's more of that transparency that sometimes people go out of their way to avoid. So yeah, there's a lot of those details that are out there that have to be addressed if we're talking about end of life. Oh yeah, that's again the denial of death. I think we always think there's more time. Like Alan said, I won't die. I'm in the hospital, I'm on a vent, pray for a miracle, things will be awesome. But there isn't always more time. Yeah. And I think so for myself too. Like, I had an advance directive in Minnesota. I don't have one in Ohio. It's been 4 years. I should probably do that, but I haven't yet. This is like true confessions. I should probably. I'll go home and do one right now. But it is kind of one of those things that's really easy to put off. I'm young. Nothing's going to happen. All that. So, yeah. Yeah. Other reason. I can throw some out if you want. Okay. I think another reason is I'm not sure people know what they're supposed to be talking about, right? I just pull the plug. Okay, but that doesn't give us a lot of detail about what you want and in what situation you want things to be done. So what decisions do they need to make? How do they know how to make them? Some of the materials in your folder, again, there's 2 worksheets. I think one's my hopes and values, my beliefs, and there's a lot of things in there. So those are actually pretty detailed worksheets, which I think is helpful because it sort of walks you through, okay, what actually are we talking about? Do I want to have enough pain medication to keep me comfortable, but I also still want to talk to my family? What's the line there? So those are things that people often don't think about, but those worksheets are meant to get people thinking. So if you're talking to your loved one, if you're talking to a parishioner, using this worksheet, I don't expect you to be able to fill it all out in one sitting. It's going to prompt a lot of questions, and they may need to talk with their medical professional about where they need to go. Everybody's primary care doctor can address specific individual issues. You can't make a blanket statement about what's good or not good for the particular health issues that folks have. But a lot of the roles as a religious leader can be to help formulate good questions that folks can bring to their medical professionals. I need to get a gulp of water. All right. Another piece of this, so that people know what to talk about, is to take advantage of situations as they present themselves. I've seen my parents and my grandparents have friends go into the hospital. And oftentimes when that happens, they have feelings about the different kinds of treatment that they're getting or not getting. Those are great opportunities to talk with them about what they might want or not want, or what they're pleased about in their friend's care or not pleased about, and to kind of make it a natural progression from that conversation. That can be really, really helpful. So if there's one thing that I could tell you, it's that. That way it also doesn't feel so artificial, that you're sitting them down and having a conversation. If it comes up in conversation, excellent. Go with it and see where you might travel down that road together. Excuse me. Another reason that folks might resist talking about their wishes is there does exist some distrust of the medical system. We're afraid of giving our control over to someone else. We write something down. It feels like it's chiseled in stone. Do we trust people to carry out these decisions? And then there are also some cultural groups in our country who have been oppressed by the medical system, and there's some trust that we have to rebuild because of how we've treated some people. And we may be able to say, well, we're not going to do that to you, but that history still exists. So we're conscious of that too, that there are certain groups that it's not so easy just to say, yeah, fill out an advance directive and we'll follow it. They may not naturally have that kind of trust of us. So that's another piece. Let's see. Thank you. So I am curious what kinds of questions you all have brought with you tonight. We've got some experienced folks who can help out, and maybe I can help out and just see what kinds of issues you want to talk about. Yeah. Alan? I don't want you to feel alone. It's a scale. So you can fill out one today, but that doesn't mean that somebody's going to read it and go, your conscience standing right in front of them and saying, I don't want this done, and they're going to do it. You have to be incapacitated in some way so that you can't be making those decisions at that moment. Yeah. Photocopy that. Yeah, so it may be the time to do a healthcare power of attorney if he wants you to make those decisions. You did. You did. And that's the other caveat is we can't make people have these conversations if they don't want to have them. You know, we can give you all the good advice and ideas about how these conversations can happen, and some people don't want to have them. So, yeah, sorry.
Sometimes it does help to stress that if you don't have this conversation, well, this is how it goes down. So it's the majority of the citizens No, not in Ohio. In Ohio, so in Ohio, it depends on your company, but the statute essentially as far as the if the district can't reach the next event or then everything is going to go off the I-Cross.
Put it on the refrigerator. Those are the two places that the EMTs, if for some reason, family or neighbors can call the squad, that they will look for them. And without that piece of paper, they will continue to do everything to be possible. And we will be transported to the hospital that you and our life. So make sure that that is very, very clear. That one's good.
I've also had EMTs say to put it next to medications because they're going to be looking for medications as well. So that's another place where it might be. In terms of talking to congregations about this, I've been in churches where we've done several different things. One of the churches that I was at in Minnesota, they had a couple weekends in a row where they kind of did all of these things. So they had somebody come and talk about, the pastor talked about the theology of death. What do we believe? Somebody came and talked about elder law. What kinds of things do folks need to be considering? They had a worksheet for, what do you want for your funeral? I filled one out, and the pastor put it in her file, and when the time came, she would have hymns and flowers and all that kind of good stuff. So it was done ahead of time. All those things that you're wondering about, and let's do it just like mom did it. That's fine too, but there are other ways to do it, and sometimes folks want to talk about that beforehand. And then we also had a piece that was about advanced directives, questions around that. And OhioHealth can help to resource your congregation if folks are interested in doing pieces of that. But that's one way to kind of, I think, build up some interest in it. People are having these conversations. Every time I go and speak to a Sunday school class, there's at least 20 folks there that are like, yeah, I'm going through this right now with my mom. Yeah, my grandma and I did this. Yeah, I need to make an advance directive. How do I do this? So people are thinking about it, even if they aren't necessarily talking about it. Other questions? Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Well, again, remember that these aren't legal forms. They're just worksheets. So if your mom fills that out, part of it would be looking at it and talking to the pastor, like, how can you help us with these decisions? And if they say, I don't know, that's a little harder. But a chaplain can help, because chaplains are doing this all the time. So I think, punt, use it however you want to. I think those questions are really there more for conversation starters than anything that we would necessarily put in the chart. And that's a part of what I like to emphasize. The documents are really important. The conversation is really important. So when someone gets in the hospital, if they have a document in front of them, it gives you some information, but there are always gray areas. And if you've had the conversation, you can interpret some of those gray areas that may not be included on a form. So when you're trying to, if you haven't done the form, if you've had the conversation with grandma about what she wants and doesn't want, you can use the information that you're given and make good decisions around that. It's always good to have the form. But if you have the form and no conversation, I don't think that's good either. I think the conversation is the most important piece. It's great if you fill out the forms too. Yeah. That question comes up in every Sunday school class that I talk to. No, it's not new. You're not the only one thinking about it. Everybody's thinking about it, I think. So the question, if folks didn't hear it, was about assisted suicide. And there are lots of different pieces around it. I think that's an important piece of it. I know I've talked to several friends who that are in the disability community that are really, really concerned about physician-assisted suicide. And how do you make those decisions? So I have more questions about it than I do answers. I don't know if any of you...
It's not uncommon for us in hospice to get that question. Do you need help and you don't? I don't answer those questions. And you just, I don't know, it's more of a listening document and get, what's good in your life, what's good in your life, how can you help with these days when you're not, like, you want them to be, how can you still find some quality, is a new decision you'd like to see before the end comes.
And it might be, again, one of those I'm not afraid of death, I'm afraid of dying. It's that process that feels like it lasts forever, or it's really painful, or sometimes those are the fears that go along.
And a quote from hospice, I think, is hospice is not the last painful for reality. We have patients on for 2 or 3 years,
And partly it's because you take such good care of them.
And sometimes people come on and they graduate. I mean, that happens with the death. And we had it for 3 and a half years. Because we've got the right medications and the oxygen and the things that we need. But we can, I would say with probably at least 90 to 95% assurance to a family and patient to be not in the lifestyle. I mean, there are some that just, unless we just absolutely love them. And I think those are the ones is a good thing for the national plan. And that's by getting us these money so we can start to explore how to make a relationship with these patients and their families and start to explore that. And working with the family right now on some severe forms of reconciliation. They've been estranged for years and years. Now the patient is looking at the end of his life, and I think it's going to come severe when he realizes. So getting the son across the United States to model to see his dad for the first time. Those are the types of things that we work on as chaplains.
Thank you for the question, even though I don't know that we answered it.
It's one that comes up frequently.
It does. Yeah. I have no idea. It is? Okay. Okay. There's a piece of that in there. Move to a different state. Yeah. Other things, yeah. Yeah, actually, in the advanced directive form, I believe there's a piece of it that's in there as well. Yeah. I think if you have questions about it, sure. I think the donor registry, you guys can help me with this because you're doing all the, well, hospice, maybe not so much.
You always told me about it.
Okay.
And some, we've had several bodies where we've donated to medical clinic. Sometimes they qualify, sometimes they don't. They have to review them as a record in order to plan out that, given diseases and the history of them, so forth, is going to be appropriate for their uses.
That's one of the calls that chaplains make in the hospital when someone dies or is dying, is to the Lifeline of Ohio and the iBank. So to see if the person is a donor and those kinds of things. So, yeah.
Those are tough conversations that I would do. What I said about we want to come to office.
That is another conversation that halfway has the Department of Security, the donor registry, the way Ohio was framed it up, which is actually true across the entire United States. We created John and authorized for coverage. It's essentially a John. Your family may or may not be able to hold its agreement.
It says in there you could use it for any purpose, for research, or for only for transplantation. You have the ability to make that designation.
I knew you guys would have good questions. Anything else we need to talk about while we're here together? Mhm. So, it's true. It's interesting being a hospital chaplain. So in your folders, there's also a couple of other informational items. In the back on the left-hand side, there is a newsletter that I mail out every quarter that goes to faith communities that just talks about different topics of things that are going on within OhioHealth. A couple of issues ago, we did one on chaplaincy, and so I just included that in what you've got there, just so you have a little bit more information about what we do and what services can be helpful to either you, your family, your parishioners when you're in the hospital. And then there's also a listing of some educational opportunities that we provide for folks. So if you're interested in being involved in those, you can let me know as well. And my card is also in the folder. So if you have any more questions, I may refer it to somebody else, but you can contact me through that information, and I can get you the answer or talk with you about having a speaker come to your church or providing different kinds of educational programs for you if you're interested in that. So, all right. These guys will be here afterwards if you want to ask kind of a one-on-one question. They're here, and I'm here. And feel free to reach out and contact us if you need anything else. Thank you.